Today is February 15th, 2013, and my name is Dale Hannon. I am interviewing Hollace Westfeldt. This interview is being recorded for the Maria Rogers Oral History Program. This interview is being filmed by Megan Bose. Hollace, please tell me when and where you were born.
I was born February 18th, 1947 in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Where did you grow up?
We moved from Worcester when I was 6 months old. I lived in Brookline, Mass. Until I was 8, and then we moved to Newton,
Massachusetts,
which is just the next town.
Can you describe your family?
Mother, father, me. But I also had my parents' best friends. Their names were Melvin and Deborah Ludwig. They could not have children biologically, and so they co-parented me with my parents long before co-parenting was a known concept.
What about grandparents, aunts and uncles?
Okay, grandparents. My father's parents lived in Boston. Actually, my father's father died, well, they did live in Boston, but my father's father died when I was 1. I have no memory of him. My grandmother, my father had a brother who lived in California, and cousins that they'd come visit sometimes in the summer, but they were much older than I am, and I don't really remember them. I vaguely remember that they visited, but I don't have much of a relationship with them. My father had another brother who lived in Brookline, and he had 2 daughters. One daughter was much older than I am. My younger cousin was a year older than I am. We were not terribly close because our mothers hated each other, and there was all this family stuff.
And on your mother's side?
Wait, one second. My father also had a sister, my Aunt Molly, and she never got married. She, as was common in those days, maybe more now these days, but she lived with her mother to take care of her mother. Her father was dead, her brothers were gone and married, and it was the daughter's role. And so she lived through that, and she's lived with my grandmother until she could no longer take care of my grandmother. And then my grandmother went into a nursing home, and my aunt lived in an apartment.
And on your mother's side?
On my mother's side, they lived in Worcester, Mass., which is about an hour from Brookline, Newton. My mother had a large family, and they were very close. She had a sister who essentially raised her. My mother was an oops baby, and there was like 20 years between her next sibling and her. So my aunt raised her pretty much. That grandmother died when I was 2.5. The only thing I remember about that grandmother was that whenever we'd drive up to the house, she'd be on the front porch, and she'd have Wonder Bread with sugar and butter on it. And that was like, I know you look horrified. It was pretty horrible, but it was so good to a little girl. So, that's how I remember my grandmother. Wonder Bread with butter and sugar. And her husband, my grandfather, lived till 1966. But she died, like I said, when I was 2.5. And I do have a picture of her, so of that whole family, which is really a very sweet picture.
Now, the friends, the Ludwigs, who co-parented you, were they Jewish?
Yes.
Okay. Can you describe your neighborhood?
Suburbia. Split-level ranches, everyone looked the same. There were a lot of kids on the street. A couple were older than me, but mostly the same age. Some that were younger that I babysit for. Mom stayed home all day long, dads went off to work.
And was that a Jewish neighborhood?
Totally. There was not one non-Jewish child in my elementary school. It was 100% Jewish. School closed for the Jewish holidays, the whole bit.
How was your Jewishness expressed when you were growing up?
My father did not allow religion in the house, with the exception of the high holidays, which I'll go back to in a second. My mother was raised Orthodox. She would have preferred that, you know, we had religion in the house. She probably would have kept kosher. We probably would, if she had a different husband, well, if she had a different husband, I wouldn't be here, but who would allow religion, she probably, I'm going to guess that we probably would have belonged to a conservative shul. She probably would have kept kosher. We probably would have done all the holidays. As it is, my father allowed her to take me to the services for the high holidays. That was it. That's all he allowed. When I was little, we did Hanukkah. I mean, I remember presents. I don't remember lighting candles, but we probably did. That ended when I don't remember ever lighting candles, so I must have been pretty young. He did allow my mother to send me to Sunday school if there were two conditions. One, she found a temple that did not require that he join it. And two, the first time I came home and said, I don't want to go back, that was it. So I actually made it through first grade. And then I said, I'm never going back, and that was it.
Do you know why your father felt the way he did?
Absolutely. His grandfather, his parents came from Vilna, and his grandfather was a shachat, you know, the butcher who makes meat kosher. And he got caught smoking on the Sabbath and was basically excommunicated. That turned my entire dates, my birth name, my maiden name is Dates, and that in turn, the entire Dates family, nobody had religion, nobody got bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, nothing. I mean, nobody went to Sunday school. I think we probably all went to high holidays, and that was it. So he was one of the few things he actually put his foot down with my mother. She got away with murder, in my humble opinion, but he absolutely insisted on that.
So what part did Judaism play in your formative years?
Probably not a significant role. I mean, we were all Jewish. You know, on the holidays, you know, if we could skip school, we skipped school and we hung out, but it really didn't, religion didn't play any part, really, in growing up, other than culturally and socially and secularly.
Was being Jewish important to you in any way?
I'd have to say no.
Why?
It didn't stand out. I wasn't allowed in the house. It didn't stand out. Everybody around me was Jewish. I mean, there was no diversity whatsoever. I think it's probably something I just took for granted. I don't know.
Did you feel accepted by other Jewish families and friends?
Absolutely. I mean, we were all the same. I mean, yeah.
Is being Jewish today important to you?
Absolutely.
Why?
Why? I guess, I mean, I know I'm Jewish. I've always known I'm Jewish. In the mid-90s, early to mid-90s, just a bunch of, I lived in Netherlands then, but where did I work? I worked at Boulder Public, and I had friends in Boulder. And we just would get together and talk about Jewish stuff. And it just evolved.
So before the 90s, you didn't have those feelings?
Not completely. When my son was little, I actually made him go to Hebrew school, religious school, for 2 years. He made it a year longer than I did. I don't know why, but there was a little voice inside of me that said, "You're Jewish, your son is Jewish." I just wanted to give him something that I didn't have. It was not articulated, it wasn't a fully formed thought, it was just sort of a gut feeling, something I knew I wanted him to have. At that time, I was a single mom, I was working full-time, and I was in graduate school at night. There was no way that I could get involved with a community, a congregation, and I sent him to Reconstructionist Sunday school, but I couldn't model what I wanted him to do. And so it sort of was tabled for many years.
How old is your son today?
42.
Does he feel Jewish?
If you asked him, I'd say he identifies as Jewish, but other than Hanukkah, which I impose, I know he doesn't raise his children Jewish. He's secularly Jewish. He has a Hebrew name. He has a better memory than I do for stories in history, and he'll tell the kids stories. I mean, he could tell you the Purim story, he could tell you, the Hanukkah story, he could tell you the stories, he remembers it all. But he doesn't celebrate it, really. Hanukkah was my idea because they live on the East Coast, they live in Brooklyn, and I wanted my grandchildren, by now, I have a much more established Jewish identity, and I wanted my grandchildren to get some Judaism. So I started, and this could have been a mistake. I mean, it's getting to be an expensive thing now, is I started sending 8 presents because Dylan would call me every single night, and we'd light the candles together, and we still do it. We light the candles every night together, and we say the prayer, and then the kids open their presents. And it gives me the opportunity to participate in their lives. And when Dylan sends, my son's name is Dylan, when he sends pictures, I get to see outfits they wear that I bought, or toys they're playing with, or books they're reading. It just puts me in their lives.
You mentioned that you lived in Nederland. Is that where you lived before you moved to Boulder?
Right before I moved to Boulder, yes.
How long did you live in Nederland?
10 years.
Where did you live before that?
Denver.
Why and when did you come to Boulder?
I first came to Boulder in 1970. I was pregnant. I was married and pregnant. And my former in-laws, and my ex-husband obviously, grew up in Boulder. Lived in Boulder. And we came to Boulder from Maine. We lived in Maine for a year after we got married. And then my then husband, was a ski instructor, and he wanted to come back to Colorado. So we moved out here. His mother lived in Boulder. No. She had been out of state for a while, and she was just moving back to Boulder. And so she rented, remember the Harvest House? Used to have 3 cabins down by the creek. She rented all 3 for the summer. And so she had one, my husband and I had one, and the 3rd one was a guest cabin. And so we were in Boulder for most of the summer. And then we moved to Steamboat, where he got a job every place he applied. I got to pick the town we moved to because I'm not a skier. So it was a matter of where would I feel the most comfortable.
Tell me about your education.
I went to Boston University, got a degree in elementary education, and by then Weems, my ex-husband's name is Weems. He and I were dating, and I went right from Boston, my graduation, and we went up to Hanover, New Hampshire, where he was at college, Dartmouth. And at the end, his graduation was a month later, and we were planning on both coming out to Colorado after he graduated. But life happened, and exactly 2 weeks after I graduated, right in between the two graduations, I fractured my skull. And I couldn't walk. I was in a coma for 3 weeks, couldn't walk, that took a year till I could walk by myself. I didn't write for 5 years. I was a mess. I had to be completely rehabbed. What was the question? Why am I telling you this?
Tell me about your education.
Oh, so my life was sort of put on hold. But eventually, when I could do everything again, take care of myself, I started working in libraries. I was just a library clerk, and I decided at some point, once I could write, walk, talk, everything again, that I wanted to go to library school. So I applied to the University of Denver and got a master's degree.
In
library science.
Okay. Would you like to say anything about why you ended up in a coma with a fractured skull?
I was a lot more wild in those days. I was 21. My ex-husband had a motorcycle, and we would ride on the bike all the time. And one day we were out. It was actually in Vermont, and we were on a one-lane road, and so we were going down the road, and a woman pulled out from, I guess it was 2 lanes, 1 lane each way. She pulled out to turn onto the road, and she saw us, and she froze. And her husband was right behind her, and he froze. There was no room for us to go in between. And Williams had to make a quick decision: hit the car, pray for the best, or go over an embankment and kill us both instantly. So he chose hit the car, pray for the best. He landed on his feet. And a couple of years ago, for many, many years, I thought that I just landed on the highway. And a couple of years ago, I found out that, in fact, I had leaped over. I'm not sure that the word is. I went over a whole car length and landed on the highway without a helmet. I had a helmet on when I started, but it was off by the time I hit the highway.
So it was a motorcycle accident?
Yeah.
Okay. Coming back to your education, how did you make your living?
In the early years after the divorce, I guess I lived on child support because I still wasn't healthy enough, really. Eventually, I started volunteering in a temple library just for something to do that didn't require my writing or my doing a whole lot. I mean, physically. It was just simple library stuff, but I fell in love with it. And eventually I just got other volunteer library jobs until I started getting paid library jobs. And then I went back to library school.
What was it like being Jewish in Boulder when you first arrived?
When I first arrived in 1970, I have no idea. I wasn't at all involved. My husband wasn't Jewish. But curiously, his mother had converted to Judaism on her second marriage, but she wasn't. She was divorced from that husband and wasn't particularly observant. I had no connection with the Jewish community at all. We were here for a few months, then we went to Steamboat I really had no connection to the Jewish community for many, many years.
In the 90s, when you came from Netherlands, what was it like being Jewish here?
I mentioned before that I would meet with friends who were Jewish and we'd just talk about being Jewish. And some of the people in that little group belonged to Nevei Kodesh, the Jewish Renewal community. What is now Nevei Kodesh, it was then the Jewish Renewal community of Boulder. And I just went to services just to see what it was like. Because in our little group, we did some of the rituals. You know, we'd say Kaddish and there was a healing prayer, but mostly it was talk. We lit candles, but mostly it was just talking. And I just went to services and I fell in love with Chitzer Firestone. I thought her services were fantastic. She spoke to me. I loved Jewish Renewal. And I joined Renewal, Jewish Renewal community of Boulder in 1996.
What is it like being Jewish in Boulder today?
What is it like being Jewish? I've been involved with Jewish Renewal community of Boulder. Eventually split into two communities. One is Nevei Kodesh, which I'm a part of, and the other one is Pardes Levavot. I stayed with Nevei, and I'm very involved. I used to be more involved than I am now, but for the past 10, 12 years, I've been pretty involved.
In what way?
What year was it? In the year 2000, I took a training in Bikur Cholim, which Bikur Cholim literally means visiting the sick. It's much more than that to me, which I'll explain in a minute, but at that time, in the year 2000 or 2001, I can't remember, Deborah Bronstein, who was the rabbi at Har Hashem, Har Hashem is the only one that had a Bikur Cholim group. People from the congregation who went to visit people in their congregation who were sick. I took the training in early 2000s and from Deborah, from Rabbi Bronstein. The commitment for the training, there was no charge for the training, the commitment was 2 years to doing Bikur Cholim for Har Hashem. I was perfectly willing to do that. But after taking the training, or maybe during the training, I spoke to Rabbi Bronstein and I said, you know, I will serve Har Hashem for 2 years, no problem. But what I would like to do to fulfill my commitment is to bring Bikur Cholim to then Jewish Renewal Community Boulder, so that we had we provided the same services. And she was thrilled with that. And Ruth Siegel, who also belongs to Nevei, I think she had taken that training several years before I did. But for one reason or another, didn't have the foresight to, or maybe she did in her own way, but it wasn't an extant group of people. So Ruth and I started Bikur Cholim at Nevei. I want to say something. Ruth is wonderful. Ruth is Miss Bikur Cholim. She takes care of everybody. So on her own, she would take care of people and visit people and give people rides and visit and cook, but it wasn't an actual group that was actively went out and sought volunteers to be part of the Bikur Cholim team. That was something we did together.
Were there any other jobs involved in this position?
Other services we provided. Yeah, we cook meals for well, we cook meals and we have a freezer, and we just, when somebody needs it, the meals are there, or we cook things fresh depending on the circumstances. Taking people for rides to doctor's offices, visiting in the hospital, in hospitals, in nursing homes, in rehabs. It's basically being supportive of people who are home either because of an illness or an operation, or, I mean, we've done it for people who have, for women who have just had children, you know, have new babies and kids at home. Yeah, all those things.
Were you engaged in any other Jewish organizations in the community?
Was I engaged in other organizations?
Jewish organizations.
I realized that. Yes. In the early 2000s, maybe 2002 or 3, the Chevra Kadisha, Tirza brought the Chevra Kadisha. You'd have to double check me on my dates. I'm not sure, these are the dates that I sort of vaguely remember, but the Chevra Kadisha, which is the Jewish Burial Society, Tirza, Tirza was the rabbi who she was sort of like the head rabbi of the whole thing. All the rabbis in Haver, which is the rabbis group, so is Rabbi Bronstein, and whoever the rabbi was at B'nai Shalom at the time, I don't remember. It's Mark Soloway now. Now there's another Jewish Renewal community, so Victor Nadia Gross. They all get together and talk about, I don't know, rabbi things. But Tirza was sort of the one who she was sort of the head rabbi to the Chevra Kadisha. We provide 2 services. We sit Shmirah, which is after a Jewish person dies, if they so choose, and before they're buried, we'll sit with the bodies for 24 hours, well, until they're buried, to guard their souls, and we do that in 2-hour shifts. And we also do Tahara, which is the ritual washing. Men wash men, women wash women, and I do both. Well, I did both. I do not do Tahara anymore because my shoulders, for health reasons, I don't do that anymore. I still sit Shmirah. As far as define organization.
You've done a good job of describing the organizations. Any kind of groups? Are there other organizations that you can tell me where other Jewish people belonged? Okay,
yes. Rabbi Nadia Gross, who is the co-rabbi of Pardes Levavot with her husband Victor, does what she calls a doula training. It's an end-of-life doula training. So basically, I and other people, men and women in Boulder, have been trained to basically midwife people through the end of their lives. I've done that on 2 occasions. I've had 2 women that were at their end of their lives, and I would meet with them. I met with them just to talk, just to be a friend, talk. I'd read Jewish stories. It depended on the person. What you do in these situations, or in these relationships, is driven by them, by the person, by what they need.
Can you name any other people that you worked with in some of these groups?
Barbara Lou Cohen, Ruth Siegel. Who else is in Bikur Cholim? If you'd asked me that ahead of time, I would have thought. But I can't think of people from Har Hashem. Barbara Gould is the point person for the Chevra.
What influenced your Jewish activism in Boulder?
Tirza.
Was there a connection that you know of to the Denver Jewish community or elsewhere?
Was there a connection?
Between the Boulder Jewish community and the Denver Jewish community?
Loosely.
How?
I mean, the rabbis talk to each other. Some of the people who belong to the various Boulder communities come from Denver. Some people from Boulder that I know of go to Denver for their religious Jewish congregation, either because they like their religious schools better, or they have family who lives here or there and they drive back and forth, or they like the rabbi better, or all sorts of reasons, I suppose. The other thing, which is the connection between Jewish Denver and Jewish Boulder, is Judaism Your Way. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Judaism Your Way is a nonprofit. Lolly Gold is the executive director. Brian Fields is the rabbi. Their target audience isn't the right word. Their target population is non-affiliated Jews. And they, Lolly will talk a lot more about when she meets with an interviewer for this project, but they have just brought, they do great work. They have, they do a lot of outreach for classes, for holidays, for just special occasions, their high holiday services. I go to high holidays, the Yom Kippur Day high holiday service in Denver with Judaism Your Way, JYW. I go to support Lolly. I mean, that was my original reason. Now I go because they're wonderful. They had 700 people last year, which is more than any congregation, established congregation that I know of, except for maybe Har Hashem. They have just, I'm babbling on, but they have just brought programs for Jewish unaffiliated teens to Boulder. So there's your Denver Boulder connection.
So it began in Denver, and they are now reaching into Boulder.
Correct.
Okay.
They are not trying to duplicate what is done in any synagogue, because they have a whole different focus. Anyway.
Other than Lolly Gold, can you tell me anybody else involved with that organization?
Jim Davis Rosenthal also goes to high holiday services there. Karen, what's Karen's last name? I'm drawing a blank on Karen's last name, but she also works for them. She'll be working for them full time. She teaches Jewish studies in Denver, Boulder, at CU, and she is involved with them too.
So how did you meet other Jewish people in Boulder?
I don't know. I just meet people. I meet, maybe through the library at work, or just in the course of living. I don't know real one way. I mean, I don't belong to the JCC. I don't know. One person, I just knew one, and then it just snowballed.
You mentioned that you did not observe Judaism growing up. What is your level of observance today?
I go to services at Nevei whenever. Generally, they're once or twice a month. I celebrate holidays. I know a little bit more about holidays. Participate in activity. I mean, it's more than the just services. I mean, it's community, and you know, we get together for Hanukkah celebrations, and it isn't an observance, but we have Tirza retired from being congregation rabbi last June, so we have an interim rabbi. And he comes from Oregon once a month for Thursday through Monday, and there's something going on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I mean, all the time, Saturday. There's always something. And I participate in that. I'm taking a class with him on Thursday nights, one Thursday night a month that he's here. Friday night services, Saturday night. There's generally a program, whether it's a concert or a celebration of something or storytelling or...
What changes have you seen from the early days of the establishment of the Jewish community in Boulder to the present?
Aha. I wrote that out because it's a long list. There are more congregations, and the congregations work together to present different programs and speakers and services. So there's more cross service, between the communities. Members of Nevei Nevei Kodesh now has Bikur Cholim in addition to Har Hashem. I'm pretty sure the B'nai Shalom has a Bikur Cholim too. And because not many, but there's a percentage of people that belong to more than one shul. So when people are in need, like if somebody in Nevei had an operation, that person may also belong to B'nai. We work together. The Bikur Cholims work together to help whoever needs it. The Chevra Kadisha, we have had trainings in Tahara. We have done that. It used to be once a year. We haven't done it in a couple of years, but it's something we've been talking about doing again soon. Programs on end-of-life issues. And as Bikur Cholim will bring meals to families where somebody is ill or had surgeries, the Chevra Kadisha does that for families who have had a death. The doula training I mentioned, that definitely is new, or newish since I started. JFS, Jewish Family Services, has opened a satellite service office in Boulder. There are more Jewish film festivals at the library, at the JCC, and this year is either the first or the second year that the Jewish Film Festival is going to be held at the Bow Decker. And Stephanie Rudy, I know, talks to Catherine Bernheimer about, the films and talkbacks and stuff like that. Both Nevei Kodesh and Har Hashem have gay and lesbian Havarot. Judaism Your Way, I mentioned. They have brought teen programs for girls and boys, plus B'nai mitzvah classes for the unaffiliated. I think the JCC has expanded their classes and their programs and services. Reb Zalman, that's probably been the biggest, well, to me, because I belong to Jewish Renewal. Reb Zalman was one of the founders of Jewish Renewal. It was co-founded by another rabbi, Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, who is no longer with us. He died, I'm not sure when, but years ago. But Reb Zalman lives in Boulder. He moved here in the 90s. So Boulder is the epicenter for Jewish Renewal worldwide. Definitely national. There are more national members of Renewal. The ordination programs that happen once a year, the ordinations that happen once a year used to be in Boulder, now it's in Broomfield because the Omni has, I don't know, is bigger, cheaper, I don't know what. But because of Reb Zalman's presence in Boulder, we have rabbis, Jewish Renewal rabbis coming to give talks, to give special services, to lead concerts, to just come here and soak up the wisdom and the richness of the Boulder community. Reb Nadia has a World Wisdom series. People come from not fluent on World Wisdom series, but people come and they have meetings and they learn a lot. I think they also go up into the mountains as well as here. So you have people coming from all over the country that bring lots of different stuff.
Is there anything else that you would like to share?
Well, I have a few pictures of my family that might be nice. Okay.
Who is in this photograph?
That's my father. His name was Maxwell Dates, only he went by Mickey. Everybody called him Mickey. Mickey Dates, and my mother, Ruth Dates, and that's their wedding picture.
Do you remember the date?
I do. September 2nd, 1945.
Okay, thank you. Who is in this photograph?
This is my father's graduation picture from MIT. He graduated from MIT in 1932.
Who is in this photograph?
That picture is my father, Mickey. He, as you can see, he's got an eye patch on there, and that's something I'd like to briefly mention. In 1958, when he was, I don't know how old he would have been around 48, and I was 12, he was diagnosed with cancer of the tear duct. He had his eye removed, and in 1958, I guess it was in 59 that the operation had happened. Medical science and surgery wasn't as advanced as it is now. He had his eye and his eyelid, everything taken out, and they could not put a false eye in because of everything else that they had to take out. So he basically had a hole in his head, and he wore a patch. He didn't always wear it at home, but he always wore it out. And that picture was 1964, I believe. He died in 65.
Thank you. Who is in this photograph?
This photograph. This is probably my all-time favorite photograph. This was my grandparents, my mother's parents, my maternal grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. My grandfather, Abe Glass, and my grandmother, Fanny Glass. This is my mother, Ruth Dates, my dad, Mickey Dates, and there's an 18-month-old me. And the rest are cousins and their spouses and kids.
Where was the photograph taken?
In Worcester, Massachusetts, in my Aunt Ida's backyard. She had this big, I don't know, it was a stone seat. We used to have picnics and stuff back there, but that was the scene of the 50th wedding anniversary party.
Thank you. Who is in this photograph?
This photograph is of my heart parents, which I mentioned early on in the interview. That's Melvin Ludwig and his wife, Deborah Ludwig. This is probably in the, I don't know, early 30s, maybe. So it was they were very young, and it was long before I was born.
Where was this photograph taken?
I don't know for sure. I'm going to guess it was taken in Boston. I don't know for sure.
Thank you. Who is in these photographs?
These are photographs of, well, 3 of them are of my father's sister, and the one photo, well, let me just do it left to right. This is my son Dylan when he was 15, and my father's sister Molly. Obviously that was a few years ago. This, again, an older picture. Now this is my Aunt Molly is younger here. This is my Aunt Molly and my Uncle Albert. And I don't know where that was taken. This picture, the first one with Dylan, was taken in my heart parent, Melvin and Deborah Ludwig's home. This, I don't know where it was taken. Again, it's Molly dates and Albert dates. And this picture, this last picture, is my Aunt Molly. Again, this was shortly before she died. She died, I think 4 or 5 years ago. And my cousin Barbara. Albert's oldest daughter is Barbara. That was taken in the assisted living facility where she spent her last few months.
Thank you. Who is in this photograph?
This is my son Dylan's wedding picture. That's Dylan on my far left, and his wife is Stephanie Menadier. Stephanie is French. This wedding took place in France in July of 1998, and that's her little flower girl. They had the same bouquets. I mean, the flower girl had a miniature of Stephanie's bouquet. It was a beautiful wedding. Stephanie and Dylan met in graduate school in the United States at Monterey Institute of International Studies, where they both got master's degrees in interpretation and translation. Currently, they live in Brooklyn, and they are both interpreters at the United Nations, based in the Manhattan headquarters.
Thank you. Who is in these photographs?
These are my grandchildren, Dylan and Stephanie's children. This is Eloise Lucille Westfeldt. She's 7 years old. Her passion is acrobatics. She's in gymnastics. She's in competitive gymnastics. She's a sweet little seven and a half year old second grade girl in Brooklyn, New York. And to her left is my grandson, Sidney Weems Westfeldt. He is nine years old and in 4th grade in Brooklyn. His passion is art and Legos. You can see he has got long hair, and here he's very proud of his long hair, but he recently had it cut, and now he is totally punk. I don't have a picture of punk Sidney, but they're both characters, sweet in their own ways. Love them both.
Thank you very much for talking with us today and sharing your story.
My pleasure.